Rincón, soy profesora de Arte Judío y Cultura Visual Judía acá en el seminario. Estamos en la biblioteca con el artista israelí Avner Moriah, a quien vamos a entrevistar en inglés, así que él nos va a contar sobre su obra y sobre su carrera artística. Hello Avner, welcome to the seminary.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here and share my art with the Jewish community in Argentina.
So Avner, it's an honor for us having you here with your art in front of us in our library. So tell us a little bit about you, how you started your career as an artist, and what made you to, and then you can tell us a little bit more how you get into Jewish art specifically.
I started in 1975 when I got out of the Israeli army. Up to that point, I was always interested in art, but never in a formal way. So only when I finished my service, I decided to go to art school and start a formal artistic education. Being a teenager or a youngster, I never had a formal art classes.
And how was your experience of being an artist, of studying art in Israel, and what were your first works? What were your first works about? And what were your interests at the time?
At the time when I studied art in the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem, most of the students were interested in minimalist and conceptual art. And I was an unusual student at the time because my interest always was figurative art. What really interested me, what I had in back of my mind, is to actually work with art that relates to my surrounding. I always thought that when you think of like the Spanish South American literature, they always tell a story about their own community and then it becomes universal. But the source is their own experience in their own country and their own lives.
Nice. So you made a lot of landscapes and things related to Israel, and then you studied abroad. How was that experience?
While I was in Bezalel, as I told you, I was searching. It was the early years. After I graduated from Bezalel, I ended up studying in the States at the Yale University. I was the first Israeli that got accepted to the fine art program there. And being in America, it was right after the Vietnam War, and we lived a year in New York, and I looked at the art that was done at the time in New York, and it was very interesting to me to see that most of the artists didn't even touch the subject matter of the Vietnam War. They dealt with other themes, and I thought it was kind of strange that they didn't. And then I thought about who am I? What is my voice as an artist? And that's how I ended up thinking of my military experience. At the time, I was interested in camouflage because in the beginning, I looked for an excuse why I didn't know how to paint well figuratively, anatomically correct. And in camouflage, the idea is that you blend into the landscape, and so it was a good excuse. Actually in camouflage, it's interesting because camouflage, the animals belong to two groups. One is the aggressor and one is the defender. And they change roles, but they're both camouflaged. So that's how I started. I ended up painting soldier themes for 8 years through my years at Yale, and then 6 years after that. To me, it was almost therapeutical because I would wake up with cold sweat at night from my military service, and this was a way to cleanse my soul. And when I finished that series, I saw a big program on public TV in the States about the Shoah by Claude Latzman. And so I decided I want to do something about the Shoah. And at that time, it wasn't a popular subject matter.
Right.
The survivors were still, I would say, in their mid-50s, early 60s, and they didn't feel comfortable talking about this subject matter. And so I decided to go to Germany and look at the paintings that were done before the war, with the idea that cultures don't change, only events take place. And if one looks at my paintings from my Holocaust series, you could see influences of the German expressionists, Beckmann and others, that were pre-war, and their works were mainly influenced by World War I. And that's how I did this series. And then I finished that project in 1988, and then I decided to do for the 500th anniversary of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, a big series of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. And in between, I kept on painting the Israeli landscapes. I went on expeditions to Israel. We lived in the States during 10 years, from the 80s to the 90s. I lived in the States, and I would go every couple of years to Israel. Did a big series of Israeli landscapes.
So certainly you were advanced for your time, for the time, because you started to paint figurative at the
Right.
time. Artists were still interested in realism and those paintings, or that abstract conceptual art. And then you started to work on the Holocaust before the 1990s Holocaust boom and memorials boom. So it's very interesting how you were ahead of your time, and it's very evident from your works that you make a lot of research for each series. So can you tell us a little bit more of these expeditions and research, if you have some artists that, for the Holocaust, you mentioned Beckmann, but if there are any artists that you consider your mother, your father, you can say, your roots?
Well, I would say that while I was studying at Bezalel and at Yale, I looked at American and Impressionist figurative painters. And slowly, those were the early years where I developed my visual language. And the uniqueness of my visual language is that I come up for each theme with a language that would suit the subject matter that I painted. So for example, since I painted the Israeli soldiers in the landscape for 8 years, my interest changed. In the beginning, I was interested in the Impressionist painters. And I thought of the fact that the light doesn't change the same way it falls on a garden, it falls on a tank, on soldiers walking in the streets. And I played with the juxtaposition between the calmness of the landscape and what actually takes place there. And then I did an expedition to Italy, and I looked at the Renaissance, early Renaissance painters like Giotto and others, where they, what happens there is like they have a zoom on the theme that they paint. It's not just a big pictorial image, but they are interested in events that take place. So my paintings shifted a bit, and that's how I worked. When I did the series of the Holocaust, as I said, I went to Germany to look at the German expressionists between the war. I actually wanted to go to East Germany to see the camps in Poland, but because I was an Israeli, you couldn't have a visa to Auschwitz or to Poland. I remember then that I wanted to visit the Villa Vanzi, where uh, the conference, and I knocked on the gate and they wouldn't let me in. So now, almost 40 years later, I was just in Berlin, and now they turned it into a museum. But as we got closer to the villa, I said we were getting close to the villa. I remember vividly the road that led to the villa, and I was interested to understand how people could turn, like, since I couldn't go to Auschwitz, I went to Dachau, and you see the mechanism of hell. And what interested me at the time, I thought of, since the subject matter was a complex one, I painted it with nudity and vivid colors to lure the eye into the canvas, to look at my paintings. Nudity always interests people, what's going on? And bright colors, the images that we have from the Holocaust, the photography is mainly black and white. And so my idea was to be deceptive like the Germans were, to get us to the camps and to actually annihilate us there, to get the viewer to look at my canvases. I did 14 or 15 major big works. Actually, the first painting the Holocaust Museum in Washington bought from a non-survivor was for me. Again, with the idea of trying to get the viewer to get into my own world that I created when I hung all the paintings in my studio. We lived in New Haven, which is where Yale University is. My wife commented at the time that I created my own hell, because the colors and the reality was like, it was a world of its own. And to tell you the truth, over the years, I sold almost all of these canvases to either children of survivors or to museums. But it was interesting that the children wanted these paintings in their homes. I mean, they were not in the camps, but for them it was a way of memorial. And my idea was to paint in art history. Usually you paint either the victorious or the victims. My idea was to put them both on the same canvas, with the idea that when one was in the cabaret in Berlin, the other ones were going up in smoke in the camps. And even in today's world, you see atrocities all over the world, either in Sudan or wherever, where there's genocide. People keep on living their lives as if nothing, it doesn't disturb them to sit in a cafe and drink cappuccino, have a piece of cake or whatever. Well, millions are starving and dying from starvation. So there is this kind of that was something that interested me, about humanity, how we could find a way to keep on living our lives and coping with the atrocities that go around us.
Wow, so this is very impressive and certainly very interesting. And your career, in some way, I understand, it moved from this experience of the young Israeli artist in America, painting his Israeli experience,
Right.
moving into some universal themes and responses to like through the Jewish experience, but through universal sensitivity. And then you, in the last decades, you turn into more traditional Jewish art to what is called illumination, the art of illumination. So it's very interesting the change of being, it's not a change, a development, and how you turn into this, you change the focus into this illumination art, and from the big canvases and the murals to this so specific and detailed art of illumination. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now and what we have in front of us, and perhaps a little bit about this experience of being this Israeli artist making Jewish art in Israel and in outside of Israel? So how did that also influence your
Actually, my first two projects that dealt with Judaism were done for the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And the person that is guilty for that change in my work was the late Gershom Kext, who was the chairman of the board of JTS. And he always said to me, Portugal, when are you going to do something for the Jewish people with a Jewish text? And it so happened that as the second Intifada started in Israel, my wife was diagnosed with leukemia. And so I moved my work to the house, because up to that point I was painting the Israeli landscape, and I have several hundred paintings in homes and museums in the US of my landscapes. And then I started getting interested in the Jewish text. Now I have to confess that at the time I knew very little about Jewish text or Jewish tradition, because I grew up in Israel, what is called secular. Secular is an interesting concept that only exists in Israel, and that you are mainly influenced by the historical experience and the cultural experience of being Jewish, but you don't belong to a Jewish theological movement, or to a synagogue, or to a kihila. And so that's what in a way affected also the development of my art, because I had to find people that would help me with the theological or visual explanation of the text. And also because I wasn't confined by a specific theology, I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted. On top of it, something that is very important for me is that I'm totally dyslexic. So I actually came with a visual interpretation of the biblical text. That's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. When I look back at my work, which is close to almost 50 years. It's really divided half to my landscapes or my social paintings or whatever, and half to the biblical text, which over the years I got more and more immersed in. The two works that I did for the seminary, one was the Gathering at Mount Sinai, Ma'amad al Sinai, and the reason that we chose this theme, it was next to the library. In New York, there was a staircase that led to the library, and I thought of situations where you go up and down in the Bible, and I thought of Ma'amad al Sinai, because that's where we got the written word, letter from God. And also I thought the 10 rabbis that were executed by the Romans, the 10 Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 commandments, the 10 plagues, and then I picked 10 midrashim that dealt with the gathering at Mount Sinai. And I worked with a friend of mine, actually, that we were two young cadets in officer school during the Yom Kippur War in the army. And he came from an Orthodox home, but he ended up being a conservative rabbi that got his degree from Shechter in Israel. And we would talk about the text and verbally, and I would have to come up with a visual interpretation. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I would tell you that the gift that I got, and I got a gift, I would say is the ability to read a couple of words and have an image in my head, a visual image. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20-some years with the text.
So in some way we can say you are making visual midrash, which is very intrinsic to Jewish tradition.
Right.
One of the most important areas of parts of Jewish art, one of the most ancient, besides the ancient Jewish art from the land of Israel, but what we have from the Middle Ages, one of the most important areas of Jewish art is Hebrew illuminated manuscripts.
Right.
So it's very nicely connected to, you are continuing a tradition which is very old, very ancient, very Jewish, because once there was printing, once printing started, scribes continued to write handwritten, not only the Torah, but handwritten Hebrew manuscripts, and then they continued to illuminate. That the art of illumination continued even through printing era, and now you are continuing this tradition and the tradition of midrash, which also appears in Jewish art. It's not only textual meaning, but
in the Middle Ages, many of the manuscripts that were Hebraic, the actual artists that illuminated them were not Jews.
Right.
In my case, I'm very Jewish, but they used craftsmen that were not necessarily Jews to illuminate their texts.
Right, but it's very interesting how you tell about this team of people that worked,
right,
like exactly as they worked in these teams in the workshop, where you had the scribe and the planner of the whole text, and then the illuminator, and then they had the colorist and other different tasks. And it's very interesting how you are connected to a tradition in Jewish art, and how this came out in Israel, actually, where art, it's very, very Israeli art. It's very much connected to the Israeli history and to the wars and to the development of Israeli societies. It's very interesting how when going back to Israel, we were actually dealing with Jewish art.
Well, it so happened that, as I said, I'm totally dyslexic. So I have a scribe that I've been working with over 20 years. His name is Izzy Kotwinski. I would say he's probably one of the best Hebraic calligraphers in the world. And what I do for each one of these subject matters, I do hundreds of preliminary studies. And for example, we're looking at the Scroll of Esther. So I did maquettes for each page in advance, so we could design where the text will be. Nothing, because the text is so complex, you have to plan in advance everything. And we would sit and discuss which image will be where, both in the Scroll of Esther that you have here, but also in the other books that I brought, in my Chumash and Shir HaShirim. We plan everything in advance.
So tell us a little bit more about this project. So you made the script, the books of the Bible. You started with Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Pakhot, Chumash, and now you're working on the Megillah, right?
The project of the Bible actually was parallel to the illness of my wife, Andy. Eventually, she passed away. She had leukemia. And I thought to myself, the doctors think they're God, and God thinks he's God. And instead of just immersing myself with sorrow, I decided I would do the opposite. I would give from and use my art to pull myself through the difficult times. And the project lasted 15 years, my Chumash project. I worked with the Hebraic leading scholar in the world. His name is Yair Zakovich. He's a professor of the Bible in Hebrew University. And what I used is concordance. In the beginning, it was more influential and talking about ideas, but as I developed my visual language, I would always go to the beginning to see where does the first time a word mentioned. Now, when you think of the Chumash, most of the text is rules, is not stories. But behind the stories, it's not like the Greek myth. There is a moral point or a rule behind it. Nothing is accidental in the text. And so I would, every time, as my library developed, my visual library, I would go and see where was the first time that the word is mentioned, and then I would compare the image of the rule to an image that I have done earlier. And so the whole thing, what I created is literally a visual commentary on the entire text. And when you think about it, it's a great way to educate. I mean, it's done at the highest levels. My works are in the most important libraries in the world and museums and so on. But it's a great way to educate young people, because not everybody is only interested in the verbal aspect, but it's a way for them to develop their imagination and for them to think, how would I come with a visual interpretation of the text? And so I have a soft spot in my heart to Jewish education. And wherever I can, and I get invited, I like to work with young Jewish kids. It tickles my heart to know that I can contribute to our continuation as people. And not everything has to be just by learning the texts. Although we sit in front of books, I will tell you I don't use most of them, but it's a nice way to bring young people and open to them the text to show them that there's more than one way to look at it.
Definitely, and also because we live in a so visual era where everything is so visual for the young generations. So it's very, very, I think it's very rich to see the images together with the text. So I think that also is very important for the new generations.
And the other thing that is important for me, for kids with learning disabilities, to show them that they can overcome their disability, that they shouldn't be intimidated, especially for my generation where dyslexia was not recognized. Most people, it can break them. I wasn't stopped. I found a way to create the highest level of art, and in a way, to me, it's very ironic that I'm in the most prestigious libraries in the world, and authors go through the front door, and I got into these institutes through the cheap. So I found my own way that my work is respected and really worldwide in really important collections that I overcame my, some would say disability, but I look at it as my strength. Because probably I wouldn't have been an artist. I wouldn't have been an artist.
Right. So you want to show us a little bit of your art?
What we're going to look at right now is my scroll of Esther. The uniqueness of my scroll is about my being an Israeli artist. I live in two worlds, in the three-dimensional world of the Renaissance and the two-dimensional world of the Middle East tiles and design. And what I do is I mix the two different languages and create my own. In this particular scroll, I have several incidents of using images and ideas from historical themes. I use, for example, what you're looking at right now is from Bruegel, the drunks. Bruegel painted the drunk people. So I am immersed in art history, and I bring it into my panels. The original panels are about 1.20 meters by 64, 65 centimeters high, and in this scroll there are 37 panels that are there. So when they're done on cow parchment, cow skin. And so one would say you sacrificed 37 cows, and I would say that I elevated them to a higher level of spirituality. Instead of them ending up as sausages, they are now closer to God. When you look at each panel, each little square and the design that I made, it's at least between 12 and 20 layers of paint. And so it's done with a brush, fine brush with 4 hairs on it, and I have many influences. I have Persian miniatures, Indian miniatures, Renaissance images, Muslim images, and I mix them all together to create my own visual language. What I'm going to show you now is my book Shir HaShirim, the book Song of Songs. In the book of Song of Songs, God's name is not mentioned. And I would assume that if his name was mentioned in the text, nobody would have edited his name out, most likely. When you look around the Mediterranean basin, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Turkey, in Greece and Rome, you find similar structures, songs and tales. So my thought that these songs were sung by women, about their love life, about giving birth, about renewal, about conceiving. All these matters were very important to women at the time. And you realize that once I started to look, I found hundreds of figurines of women throughout the region, all the way back to prehistorical time. So my assumption is that all these songs were about women, and the reason they go about all the way to prehistoric time is because from the very beginning they were intrigued. How come women are the ones that give birth? And what is the power that they possess over men, right? Because obviously men don't give birth. And so I started to look around the region, and I painted in my book next to a song an image that relates to the song, but next to the image on the other side of the page, I painted a source that influenced my work in the Book of Songs. Okay, this is another one of my projects. This is Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. My idea was, in Shir HaShirim, God is not mentioned. The name of God is not mentioned. So I thought to myself, if his name was in the text, nobody would have edited his name out, right? And this is, again, it's a prehistoric figure that was found in southern Turkey. This is Etruscan, early Roman art, Italian Roman. This is again from Egypt.
So Israeli, to be connected to the archaeology.
But this is this is a source for me for images.
Yes. It's beautiful.
This is also lovemaking, and it's only suggested. Venus, an Egyptian character. This woman is coming out of the desert, so I picked a goddess from the Saudi Arabia desert. Here I have like a Picasso influence. I mean, I do what I want. Yeah? The idea of paradise comes from Persia. The word paradise. This is the beginning. So this is an Assyrian wall relief. And so I came up with my own interpretation. This project that we're looking right now is for my Chumash project. It took me 15 years to create, and the images and the text coincide. Again, I did hundreds of preliminary studies, and I worked with my calligrapher to design one page at a time.
So getting to the end of our conversation, Avner, I wanted to ask you, what would you like to share and to say to our students and to our community? And whenever you want to share with us, and thank you, of course, for being with us.
It took me 15 years to create my Chumash. I worked with brushes with 4 hairs on it, very, very meticulous and slowly till the surface. And when I finished, a friend of mine asked me, "What did you learn?" And I'm thinking to myself, what did I learn? Because I was so busy creating the work, I never stopped to think, what is it that I learned? So I went to read Bereshit again and see that when God introduces mankind in the Garden of Eden, He says, הוא מניח אותנו לעובדה ולשומרה. He puts us there to work it and protect it. So I'm going back to my concept how I work. I thought the root lehaniach comes from the root mincha. Mincha in the Bible is a sacrifice of joy, a celebration. It's not because you want God to forgive you for any sin. So I'm thinking to myself, here God finished the creation of the world. He puts man to close up what he has done. He's so happy, so he puts us in the garden. Le'ovda. When Moses comes to Pharaoh to ask for the Israelites to go pray, he says, I want to take the Israelites la'avod et Adonai. So I look at le'ovda with the idea of emunah, of belief. Leshomra is to guard. Nobody guards unless they have some sense of ethics. Because if you don't have ethics, you don't have to guard anything. You can do whatever you want. So for me, the whole text is based on 3 words: joy, belief, and morals. Now, when you think about it, you don't have to be an Orthodox Jew. You don't even have to be a Jew altogether. You can be just a decent human being. But if you have these 3 basic elements that in the end the whole Chumash is about, that's what it is about, to set some guidance for us to live in this world as human beings. And that is my lesson, that it's the most minimal concept that you can come up with, 3 words that tell the whole story.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Avner. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for sharing your visual midrash and your interpretations and your experience.
I'm very happy. I'm very happy.
And we hope we can have you again in Buenos Aires and at the seminary.
I'm very happy that I'm here, that I could talk about my art because my main orientation is North America. But when I came here, I saw and experienced a very warm community that is connected to their heritage and to their beliefs. And I'm happy to share my knowledge and my journey with the people in Argentina.
Thank you very much. We're glad you are here.
Thank you again.